Hey Caitlyn, it's Dr. Scott. I have some feedback for you on your Essay 2 draft on the rhetorical analysis draft. Just as a reminder, here's what I'm looking for in this assignment. I'm looking for a thesis statement that's focused, that keeps its attention on the use of rhetoric. It kind of provides some glue between how you're talking about all of the different rhetorical issues that you talk about. I'm also looking for supporting evidence that helps you back up that thesis statement, and that should come from research, but it should also come from examples from the text. Also looking for research that's credible and that's actually used to support your argument and not just kind of used as filler in either the intro or the conclusion. Also looking for focused paragraphs and organization and transitions. There's some other smaller issues, but that's not really all that uh, important. I'm not going to get into all that today. So I read your draft and I took a look at your notes, and I'll get to those notes later on in the essay. I think the one of the bigger issues that I'm seeing in this draft is that I get a bit turned around. Like, it feels like this is the focus of the essay and not this, but this is really kind of what the assignment's about. And this is like, I don't know where you're going with that. I don't know what's the I mean, if that's your goal, is that like ethos and pathos are used to emphasize the themes of justice, equality, and dignity, I guess that can work. But right now, the way that many of the body paragraphs are set up, it's like I'm gonna talk about this, and then as a byproduct, I'll talk about this, and it really kind of needs to be flipped. Like, this needs to be the focus of the essay, and I think you can weave this in. It's kind of interesting, but right now it's kind of flipping what the assignment's about. It's saying, I want to talk about justice, equality, and dignity. Great things to talk about, but you got to talk about how he's trying to persuade. The other big thing that I think you could do in the introduction to improve it is to introduce the audience here, and that is kind of like the big kind of glaring issue, that in use of research, that I'm seeing here in the draft. So who is he writing to? Because it's a um, very different audience. If he's, later on you reference the "I have a dream" speech, and that is a very different audience than who he is trying to persuade here. He's trying to persuade white folks. He's trying to get them off the bench and get off their asses, and to be a part of the civil rights movement, instead of kind of sitting on the sidelines and letting other people do it, or kind of taking pot shots and saying, well, you know what, there's violence. There might be violence here, so I'm not going to have any part of it, even though that it's not the black protesters at the time that were causing that violence, which sounds familiar. Um, but the audience issue that's kind of missing in the essay, I don't see much discussion of audience, and that has to happen. It really has to happen, particularly when you're writing about ethos and pathos, because who decides whether or not somebody's credible? It's the audience. King can talk all he wants about his background, but if it's not a background that's kind of tailored to the people that he's speaking to, or it doesn't speak to what these folks value, it's going to fall on deaf ears. Same thing goes with emotion. He can try to persuade to emotion, but if this is not a group of people that are going to be open to that kind of persuasion, or open to those kinds of emotions, like, really gotta think about who the audience is here in these body paragraphs. Okay, so let's get into some of the body paragraphs. So again, I'm seeing here, in this paragraph, and it's a little bit more pronounced in one of the other body paragraphs, is that I'm reading through, and then I'm not seeing a reference to credibility until roughly halfway through the paragraph. So it's taking me a hard time to understand how I'm reading this. And what it's asking me to do is to kind of reread all your body paragraphs twice. It's like, okay, I'm going to talk about justice, and then I'm going to talk about ethos, and then you're kind of asking me to go back and say, okay, the issue is ethos. How is this about credibility? And I'm not sure how the two are connected. I'm not sure why the two are paired up here. So that I found a bit confusing. I'm fine with you keeping this, and maybe we can talk about what you're trying to get at here using these three. I'm not opposed to it. but I'm just not understanding how that is connecting. It feels like two different papers. One paper about this, one paper about this, and I really need the essay to be about this. That might mean that you talk about these three issues. You might say that this was the goal. These three values were the goal, and the vehicle that he used to get there is here. The vehicles need to be, this needs to be kind of what drives the essay. I don't know why I'm using car metaphors so much, but there you go. Here also, like, the audience is a super important thing to think about. These people need to find him credible. Why would it be important for white folks to know that he is part of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference? There's some organizations, and it's kind of like, I just mentioned it in somebody else's screencast, but it'd be kind of like today, like trying to persuade on the fence white folks and saying, I am a active member of Black Lives Matter. Now that might be persuasive to some, but there's some folks that have some misconceptions about what Black Lives Matter is. So leading with that, are those folks going to find it credible? Are they going to find it persuasive? Are all audiences going to hear that and say, yep, I think that that's somebody who's credible? I'm not so sure. So thinking about the audience and who the audience is, and using some research to kind of help you flesh out like how these folks, to make educated guesses at how these folks are going to respond to what King is saying, that is a huge issue to kind of address between here and the revision. So again, like I mentioned, I'm reading, and it's taking me a long time into the body paragraphs. Here is one where I think it was probably most pronounced. It's taking me until down to here to hear that this is about emotion, and then it's asking me to kind of go back and reread. So what I really kind of think you need to do here is to flip the order of things. I'm not saying to lose the justice idea. Again, I'm kind of confused like why justice is aligned with one rhetorical appeal, and why other of these ideas are aligned with others. I'm not so sure about that just yet. But what I would suggest that you do is you kind of flip the order of things here. The paragraph is about this. Put this idea or get this idea up here, and then use examples. And I'd recommend using multiple examples, not just one per paragraph. Identify what the emotion is. So there are places in his speech where he is straight up appealing to guilt. That needs to be talked about. Why is that working? And again, thinking about the audience. So what's the emotion? Why is that persuasive to a particular audience? How do you know that? Again, that kind of speaks to the research issue. Being able to take a look in journal articles, opinion polling. What were people saying about Martin Luther King at the time? Not now, not the kumbaya version that people have kind of Disneyfied and made of him. But back in the day, he was kind of a divisive figure. And people were not as sure as they are now about what they thought of him. So what's the emotion? Why is it persuasive? Why is it working as that emotion? So say, King uses guilt. Here's an example. Here's why it's working as guilt. Here's why it's working as guilt for this particular audience. And here's how I know it based on this research. That kind of pattern is really kind of important. If you can hitch that to discussions of equality or justice or whatever these other issues that you want to talk about, I think I'm okay with that. But right now, that explaining the persuasion needs to happen, and it's not coming together just yet. I think there's also the organization piece to kind of think about, and I'm not sure why the paragraphs are placed in the order that you have them. Why go from ethos to pathos here? I'm not quite sure. Or why go from justice to equality? I'm not quite sure. So there needs to be some kind of organization pattern that I can follow and understand, like you're going from one idea to another. Transitions can help you do that, but really it's arranging ideas in a place where you can explain the movement from one idea to another. That is probably more important. Okay, we'll wrap up. It's already kind of a long video. Sorry about that. So we're here at the end, kind of talking about dignity, and then there's ethos and pathos, and I'm kind of lost, like what, like with these examples. I wasn't sure like what rhetorical issue you're kind of getting at here. It felt like you're trying to have it both ways to talk about ethos and pathos, and I definitely think um, some of these things are kind of connected. And I think for me, when I see this, I'm thinking it's maybe less emotion. I mean, you can, if you can explain it and you can connect it to a particular audience, I'll knock yourself out, go for it. I'm seeing credibility here. I'm here because injustice is here. Like his values, his character is such that he is trying to right wrongs, and we tend to think a certain way about people that do that. And you mentioned Superman, which I think is kind of interesting, kind of relevant here. Um, we tend to think that we look up to people that don't run away from things, and people that run towards things and try to fix problems, and that's what he's kind of getting at here. So I think you've got a good example here that you could pair up with the earlier credibility paragraph. And what you do when you have those different kinds of examples, you get to talk about how they're similar, but also how they're different, which gives you more kind of content to think about, and also makes your writing much more interesting instead of kind of like listing out places where you see ethos, pathos, and logos. All right. I think that kind of the stump thing that you mentioned here, like I'm kind of stumped too, and I think it's kind of that that issue about, is this a paper about justice, equality, and these other kind of noble virtues, or is it a paper about persuasion? And the assignment's about persuasion. So for me, I was kind of stumped there as well. For me, the ending, I'm not particularly conclusions. I hate writing conclusions, but I think something that you could do is you could talk about, yeah, you know what, he drew our attention to some issues, and these are issues that we're kind of dealing with now. And it seems like you're sensitive to these kinds of things, and I think that could be something that you could talk about now. How is what is persuasion like now around race? How have things changed? How have they stayed the same? I think that that's something you can do for the conclusion. All right, Caitlyn, that's a lot of feedback. So let me know if you have questions. Hit me up later this week. We can chat. Visit the folks in the Writing Center to kind of talk about some of these issues. I'm here to help. There's a lot to do, but I think that you've got a couple ideas that you can kind of run with. All right, that's it for now. I'll talk to you soon.